Hello and welcome to Sabha television. I am Akhilesh Suman and you are watching Indian Standard Time. Indian Standard Time is a window to the world through which we try to understand a particular country, its society, its culture, its economy, its relationship to the world and also to India. And the guest of honor today is Excellency the Ambassador of Brazil in India, Aranha Correa do Lago. Welcome, Excellency.
Thank you very much. I'm very glad to participate in the program.
How are you feeling in India? India is a very difficult country. Sometimes it's too cold, sometimes it's too hot. How do you feel about it?
I feel wonderfully welcome in India because the country has not only an amazing history and also a fantastic cultural heritage, but most of all, it has amazing people. So I'm having a great time in India. And I have to tell you that I hope I can stay here a long time.
Oh, that's really, but it is also interesting time that at a time when you are here, there is a lot of turbulent in democracy in India, lots of issues that are also creeping in and people are talking about. So how do you feel about India in this context?
I think that for any foreigner, India is infinitely complex and we have to try to understand, but even my Indian friends say that they don't fully understand everything that is happening. But the fact is that as an amazing democracy with this incredible diversity, with this very high culture and highly qualified people, I think it's very exciting to follow these debates and see how these things are evolving in such a dynamic society.
Like Jammu Kashmir, CAA, NRC, NPR.
Absolutely. All this, you always have, you're always learning because all of these issues are extremely complex issues. And so we have to read a lot, we have to talk a lot to people, and this makes the country more and more interesting as you live in.
But Excellency, it is also happening at a time when India and Brazil are trying to go into close cooperation. And once you see this type of issues creeping in Indian politics, Indian society, economy, do you feel scared?
Not at all. I think that both are countries that everybody looked as something like countries of the future, countries that will become important, countries that would evolve in an interesting direction. What I think is that both our countries now are very conscious that they are already important.
Right.
They have already achieved enormous things. Right. They still have a huge future. They still have a lot to give, but they are already giving and they are already relevant. And somehow the world does not recognize our position in the world as we think the world should. So this unites us very much.
That's a really interesting thing that you are telling, and obviously when India and Brazil are there in BRICS, they are in BASIC, they are in IBSA. So I think there is a lot of coherence in understanding about international issues. So sometimes I feel that whether you feel that BRICS needs to be evolved that it is now, because there are so many countries in BRICS that don't correlate with each other on all the political understanding, like India and China, maybe Brazil and China, because India and Brazil both are trying to get respectable place in United Nations Security Council, but China doesn't come forward. So do you feel that we need to think beyond BRICS also?
I think we should not expect these groups to do more than we can really rationally use this group. We have to use these groups for the things that we agree on. No? Nobody is in BRICS to show disagreement on issues.
Okay.
But you mentioned 3 groups and even 4 groups, which I think cover very different objectives.
Right.
Let's start with the oldest one, which is IBSA. IBSA was created somehow as the ideal of South-South cooperation. It's right. Brazil, India, and South Africa. Why? Because these are 3 countries that are essential in their continents, that their strong characteristic is their diversity.
Right.
And so also that they can be very influential in their regions. And so somehow we got together because we have an ideal of the South-South cooperation,
Right.
and we have advanced many things together in IPSA. BRICS is a very different thing because BRICS is originally a term that was created because of the economic dimension
Right.
and relevance of these countries, and the fact that they didn't have enough influence on the Bretton Woods institutions as they should have.
Right.
So BRICS was created very much in that sense. It gained a very strong political dimension too, but let's remember that the origin is very much linked to how recognizes the weight of our economies in today's world.
Excellency, your President Bolsonaro was here recently, and I could feel the warmth of relationship, but not only between the two leaders, but also in the whole atmosphere.
Yeah.
In Delhi, when he was there, I could see in the Business Council meeting, I could see in the summit level meeting and others, there was a lot of warmth. So, do you think that India and Brazil are moving beyond BRICS and these conglomerations and going into much deeper relationship bilaterally?
Yes, I think it's something I learned very clearly in this trip is that somehow we all agreed that we had a very good multilateral relationship in WTO, UN, etc. Then that we had a very strong relationship in those plurilateral groups that you mentioned. But this visit was essentially bilateral. That was the magic of this visit.
And what is the interesting thing that I could see in the agreement signed and then action plan declared? It was though 15 agreements were signed between the two countries, an action plan separately was also released other than joint statement. So, there are 3 documents that came up after the visit. What is interesting that you wrote in action plan experience sharing. It is something unique in the action plan between the two countries that something on experience sharing between India and Brazil.
Yes, yes.
What is that?
The action plan somehow stresses the importance of doing what we said we're going to do in the documents we sign.
Okay.
So the action plan is a bit of God, we already have agreements on this, this, and this. What does the agreement mean? It means that we have a mandate. It means that we have approved that we have to work on this area.
And the first agreement was about sharing experience and sharing technology in biofuel, I think. And I was talking to some of the people related to that. They told that India and Brazil has been talking about biofuel for a long time, but it is not happening. No, actual cooperation going on. It could not take place. Do you think that this time, after you have signed an MOU, is it going to happen? Is it going to, and what way?
I think there are new elements that will that favor very much a stronger cooperation and a really practical dimension of this ethanol understanding. Is that the fact that we have not only secured our positions, our first and second producer of sugar,
right,
but the experience of Brazil with biofuels and bioenergy is already extremely mature and extremely convincing.
Yeah, India also recognizes that, but how are you going about it?
Absolutely. And the thing about bioenergy and ethanol is that it is something that is really designed for developing countries in the stage of our country's advance. So it can be very quickly implemented in India. And what are the issues that India is still facing? One is the fact that you have to import 80% of the oil you need. We started our ethanol program because we didn't have oil in the 70s. Right. So this was the main reason we had ours. So you still have this reason because you're a big importer of oil. But the second reason, and that in Brazil came second, but now is essential for India, is the air quality of cities.
Okay.
The adoption of ethanol in Brazil has improved enormously the air quality of big cities in Brazil.
Do you have also agreement and understanding on its economic dimension? Because most of the time cost issues come in between, and then the project is hold up.
Yes, you know that we have in the past, we always looked at each other's as competitors in the world market.
Right.
And we noticed that the best way forward is, in fact, for India to really invest more into bioethanol. Because India already has a very clear mandate, 10% by 22, 20% by 2030. So you have the mandate. But now we have to make sure that this mandate can be fully fulfilled, because at the moment I think it's 5.8 is the average of ethanol in Indian gasoline. For you to have an idea, in Brazil it's mandatory 27% ethanol in the gasoline. You cannot find in Brazil any gasoline without 27% of ethanol.
So when we are talking about ethanol, one of the interesting things that I could find that India and Brazil also signed a MOU in animal husbandry, and in that context, if I remember correctly, that India and Brazil also share the same cattle genome. People say that Indian cattle cows went from India to Brazil. So far distance, how can Indian cows can go there and then they share the same genome?
Yeah, it's quite amazing, because we have around 200 million cows of Indian origin. And they came to Brazil first in the 19th century through Mexico, because Mexico had imported some Indian cows in the 19th century. And little by little they came to Brazil from the north. Then in the 1920s and 30s we started to import directly, and there is a very important import in the 60s. So there is the cows of India conquered Brazil because although they started very modestly, they adapted so well to Brazilian circumstances that now we are, it's quite amazing. I'm far from being an expert in these issues.
When we talk about Brazil, when we think about Brazil, there are 2-3 things come into mind of everyone. One is football, another is women empowerment in Brazil, and third is carnival. So I will ask you the second one, that women empowerment, and there is an MOU also signed between India and Brazil on women and child welfare and development. So how will you explain that Brazil has empowered its women so well?
I'm so glad that you mentioned those three together, because women empowerment is one of the great prides of Brazil. But normally it's not mentioned at the same level as carnival and football. So I thank you very much for putting it. And it's true that women empowerment in Brazil is a fascinating thing, because somehow there is a reputation that we have, a Latin society that is not so attentive to women's rights, but you're totally right. The other day I was talking to a great woman scientist in Brazil, and she told me that that the first time she ever felt a different treatment because she was a woman was when she went to her postdoctorate in the United States. In her graduation, PhD, everything in Brazil, she had never felt any different treatment. She felt that when she went to the United States. So I think that there is also, not only in science or in business, but also it's very interesting to see that in Brazilian art. Brazilian art simply doesn't exist if you exclude women.
Right.
Our main painters, some of the most advanced artists we have today in contemporary Brazil are women. So in all the dimensions of the society, you can feel that presence and relevance of women.
So how do you inculcate this type of culture? Because in India, Prime Minister Narendra Modi has been saying that Beti Bachao, Beti Padhao. It's a good slogan in India. and Brazil has experimented on it, worked on it. So how you inculcate this type of culture?
That's a very interesting question, because I cannot tell you there is one decision or two decisions.
Yeah.
I think obviously the first thing is education. It's always education, and I think that there are some other interesting elements. Some anthropologists think that TV was a very important element, because you know that all of Brazil, mostly in the 60s, 70s, and 80s, watched the same program, because there was a very strong TV channel.
Okay.
And everybody would watch those novellas. And novellas are those very long series of 200 chapters or whatever. There was even one in India that was filmed in India that was very popular. But the novella somehow showed to all of Brazil, from the end of the Amazon to the extreme south of Brazil, somehow the more, let's say, dynamic society of Rio de Janeiro, and in which women were equally educated, their rights, etc., etc. So you have formal education, you have influence of TV, and naturally you have legislation.
Excellency, I was seeing that India and France started International Solar Alliance, and Brazil joined in International Solar Alliance. Brazil has not ratified it till now, because I don't know what is the reason. You being one of the major persons who had been working in climate change for a long time, so is Brazil going to ratify the ISA entry soon?
Yes, absolutely. There was almost the reason for which it hasn't been ratified has nothing to do with the substance. No. Brazil is totally committed to the Solar Alliance. Yeah. But there was a technical issue that it was sent in a way, and then the Solar Alliance itself changed its status. So we had to sign a new agreement with the new rules and then send it to ratification. Right. So it was absolutely nothing related to any kind of restriction about that. On the opposite.
Okay.
By the way, in the conversations between the President and Prime Minister Modi, there is full conscious of Brazil that India has advanced much more in the solar dimension, and we have a lot to learn with India. So our commitment to the Solar Alliance is very clear, and our Minister of Energy, who came with the President, went to visit the Solar Alliance headquarters. And so we are fully committed with it.
Again, related to this again, because you had been a person who has been working on sustainable development, climate change. Forestry is one of the major parts. Do you feel perturbed that how Amazon forest fire could not be stopped?
In fact, they were. The fact is that information about the Amazon is very difficult to understand, because we have to start by defining what we call the Amazon. Right. No? We have two definitions in Brazil that sometimes are confusing and sometimes are confused, and so the statistics are a bit strange. There is something in Brazil called legal Amazon, right, which is larger than the Amazon biome. The biome is what really matters from the point of view of why the forest is so important. No? So the legal Amazon has some areas that are not technically Amazon, but were called as Amazon for issues of taxes in the 1950s, and we continue to consider that concept of legal Amazon. Most of the fires that happened in legal Amazon.
Like where human habitat are there.
That surround the Amazon.
Right.
But there is no doubt that was a very difficult year. Right. There is no question about it.
I understand, sir. Sir, let us come to the strategic, dimension of India-Brazil relationship. You know that both India and Brazil are quite ambitious. They want to get their respectable place in the world. India has taken many initiatives like, Indo-Pacific. Defense issues are also very prominent for India because, threats from many quarters. So how India and Brazil are going in defense, cooperation, because you have some certain quality that is world standard.
Today, Brazil is the third largest producer of aircraft in the world after the Airbus and Boeing. The third is Embraer. So our production is very impressive as well for commercial planes, for private jets, but also for defense material. So Embraer is one of the great prides of Brazil, let's say.
Right.
Yeah. And it demonstrates that a bit like I was mentioning to you before, how our countries had advances in some areas, even if they didn't have some others.
So, can we see some further development of relationship between India and Brazil on defense issues?
I think very, very strong. Very, very strong. We have the perspective, including of having soon the Minister of Defense coming to India, because we are negotiating 2 agreements in the area of defense. We have already a factory in India that has an agreement with the Brazilian very important defense industry. So we need, both our countries have very similar objectives regarding this.
So what are those 2 areas in defense that you are going to sign? Or?
They are still under negotiation.
Okay.
But it is mostly to stimulate that there are mutual investments, because we have very complementary defense industries. We do many things you don't, and vice versa. So we should take some Indian industries to Brazil and some Brazilian industries to India. And but we need to have a policy, and since we have a strategic partnership, and now we have the plan of action of this strategic partnership, one of the things we have is a defense industry working group that is really studying these things that we could do in India and do in Brazil. Because we both defense dimension, the fact that we have 0 geopolitical issues is central.
So, do you also subscribe to Indo-Pacific policy of India?
Well, we are not in the region, so we observe with great respect and interest the perspective of the different things that are happening in Asia. But I believe that this is the kind of example of leadership of India. So we understand perfectly that India has a more complex surrounding than Brazil. Yeah, you have historic issues with some. You have the presence of China, which is the 2nd economy in the world, and soon the first. India will be the 3rd economy in the world soon. But that's why we have to understand and follow very closely the initiatives of India in the region and how this can impact some opportunities for us to work together.
I was going through your, a bit of your biography, your own development, evolution. You are an architecture critic.
Yes.
A diplomat becoming an architecture critic is also beyond my imagination.
Yeah, it's a bit strange. No, I'm an economist. In fact, I studied economics, and I immediately became a diplomat. So I've been a civil servant for 38 years. But I've always loved architecture from a historic point of view.
Right.
And so I started to write about architecture a few years ago, and so some people even published me, which I'm always amazed. But I love to write about architecture, and this is one of the great delights of living in your country, because this is the heritage. Your architectural heritage is simply unique.
Does it add to your diplomatic endeavors?
Certainly, because when I travel in India, I always try to see the authorities, to meet the press, to meet the local industry, and also to see the architecture of that region, which architecture helps enormously to understand history and to understand also economic history, because you need to have a certain economic movement to be able to build things. And so I think it makes me understand a little better some of Indian history.
We are coming towards the end of our conversation, sir. You know that the whole world is under churning. Some transition is taking place all over the world, and it is really a great challenge for diplomats all over the world how to navigate and negotiate through all these churnings.
Yeah.
And there are strong leaders now in the world who are also thinking, in nationalistic way. It is different from 10, 15 years earlier. So, how do you think that whether diplomacy will win or the politics will take over the role of diplomats in coming days?
Yeah, I think that the legitimacy of leaders in democratic countries is undisputable because they are following the rules of the elections, they are elected, and they have a mandate by their people. So I think the first thing we have to do is we have to respect the leaders that the countries choose. On the other dimension, I think that maybe we have a generation that takes for granted many things that were achieved through diplomacy.
Right.
So sometimes they think they don't need diplomacy anymore, or the diplomacy is not necessary today. I have a friend that was in Japan before here, and he was. We were discussing the fact that Japan has basically zero crime. That doesn't mean that you can eliminate the police. On the opposite, it's the extreme quality of the police, the extreme competence of the police that has to continue to work for you to maintain the circumstance in Japan that is the safest country in the world. Diplomacy is very much like that. You don't see things happening, but they are happening. One of the biggest qualities of diplomacy is very uncomfortable in today's world where everybody says what he's doing. Everybody has his whatever social media and everybody's saying what they are doing. Diplomacy is basically against this concept. So somehow we have, as diplomats, to create a more contemporary way of explaining what we do without undoing what we did and to show that we can continue to contribute.
My last question, sir, just related to it. You know that in an age when leaders of nations, head of states, heads of governments, they also have very good relations with each other, one another. So in that situation, also growth of media through which they can be connected all the times. How will diplomats find their own ways?
I think that the good understanding between leaders is something that every diplomat dreams of. So I am very lucky that we had this wonderful trip by President Bolsonaro here and that the understanding with Prime Minister Modi was very strong.
Thank you so much, Ambassador, for talking to Rajya Sabha Television.